Antiono Conte lost his temper following the 3-3 draw conceded by Tottenham on their trip to St. Mary's Stadium against Southampton, the bottom of the Premier League. And not surprisingly, there was no return for the Italian manager after the international break. However, this is not Conte's first time losing his mind like this. The Italian coach shot in several directions at the press conference, starting with the players themselves. There are 11 players who enter this field. I see selfish players. I see players who don't want to help each other and who don't play with heart. This happens because they're used to it being like this here. They're used to this. They don't want to play for something important. Conte went a long way in stating that Spurs culture is based around mediocrity. They don't want to play under pressure. That makes it easier. That's the story of Tottenham. The owner has been here for 20 years and they've never won anything. But why? Is it always just the club's fault? Or of all the coaches that passed through here, he continued. And then he even claimed that Spurs tries to destroy coaches at the club to protect the culture and players. According to Conte himself, he had tried to hide the situation for a while but just couldn't hold back any longer. But do you remember one of Conte's previous meltdowns? This also happened when he was at Chelsea from 2016 to 2018, when the club claimed that Conte's conduct over his second season, from his involvement in Diego Costa's departure to his constant complaints about a lack of backing in the transfer market, effectively put him in breach of contract. Conte quit on the club narrative largely comes from his lack of celebration in the second season. Many armchair experts of body language took that to mean he did not care anymore. Furthermore, Chelsea's poor results compared to the previous seasons were blamed on Conte giving up. The same thing happened when he was in Italy. He was managing Juventus from 2011 to 2014. Conte was quickly compared to a certain Jose Mourinho because of his charisma, his convincing results, and his variable and innovative tactical choices. But also because of his rants, his sometimes excessive pride, and his insinuations about possible conspiracies, including his team would be a victim. Back in 2012, Antonio Conte was suspended for 10 months in connection with a match-fixing case known as calcio commesse. The Italian sports courts confirmed on appeal the suspension sentence taken against him by the disciplinary commission. A couple of months later, his suspension went from 10 to 4 months, allowing him to return to the bench already in December 2012. The departure from Juventus was reportedly due to disagreements Conte had with the club's board over transfers for the following season. And then, before arriving in Tottenham, he had beef with Inter Milan management's department. Nobody knows for sure what was the real cause of the Italian's departure. Some blame it on the COVID pandemic, and others on the fact that Conte and the owners shared different visions for Nerazzurri's future. During his time in Milan, Italian media said the parting was down to Conte's unhappiness with plans to cut costs due to the impact of the coronavirus pandemic, while Inter president Steven Zhang later explained that they had different ideas. Back in London, Antonio Conte had a reputation. He was a troublemaker in and out of the pitch. We saw what happened after the game against Chelsea when the Italian and Tuchel convicted. When provoked, Conte easily loses control and he can say things he should not say, especially in front of cameras. And that's what happened after the game against Southampton. He was so upset at the press conference because Tottenham were leading 1-3. The Spurs are bogged down in a crisis, and it came as no surprise that Spurs now will have to look for a new head coach following Antonio Conte's little freakout at a press conference after the match. The players, the club, everyone took for his rank. The head coach had obviously forgotten the filter of his speeches at home. Very irritated, the Italian technician no longer wanted to defend his players. Excuses, excuses. Always find excuses for them. We are professionals. The club gives us a lot of money. Make excuses. And he doesn't go with the back of the spoon. The problem is that we have shown that we're not a team. We have 11 players who come onto the pitch. I see 11 selfish players who don't want to help others, who don't give their heart on the pitch. Little by little, Conte was also questioning the ambition of the club. First subtly. Until now, I've tried to hide it all. But what can we fight for right now with this attitude? This commitment? Why? 7th? 8th place? And then he did put on his very big clogs, forgetting to weigh his words. They're used to that here, not playing for something important. They don't want to play under pressure. They don't want stress. It's easier that way. That's the story of Tottenham. The owners of the club have been here for 20 years and they have never won anything. Why? The responsibility is only that of the club or those of the coaches who stay here. How would players react to that? They didn't get to hear his words after the departure from St. Mary's. Luckily for everyone, Conte and the player will not have to make up after the international break after all. There were also questions in the media about the board if they would accept his behavior. After all, better managers than Conte is hard to come by when you're a club like Tottenham. Maybe that's why they didn't sack him right away. It must have been a difficult decision for Daniel Levy. It's one thing to say these kinds of words in the dressing room, but in the press conference, it's not the most appropriate thing to do. For Antiono Conte, it may be hard for the Italian to find a club anytime soon, because as we already mentioned, it's not the first time he acts like this. In Italy, it'll be difficult for him to go back to Inter or Juventus, but maybe in another series, a club will take him. He was once considered in France to be the Paris Saint-Germain coach, and since the French team is not in the best phase right now after being eliminated by Bayern Munich in the Champions League, the club may be looking for a new manager soon. The story between Tottenham and Antiono Conte did not have a happy ending. But let's not forget that Antiono Conte has won several trophies with clubs, such as 4 times in Serie A, once with Inter and 3 with Juventus. 1 Premier League with Chelsea in 2021, as well as the FA Cup in 2018. He doesn't have a bad CV, and he even won the Globe Soccer Awards Best Coach of the Year award in 2013. So, the Spurs are still 4th with 49 points, and they can still fight for a Champions League spot. It'll be interesting to see who their next manager will be. After all, the Spurs hired the Italian manager to be competitive. He even was the 4th best paid manager in the world, earning 1.49 million euros per month, behind Simone, Guardiola, and Klopp. One thing is for sure, when he now leaves London, he won't find a club that'll pay him this much, especially if he continues to behave like this in front of the cameras. This kind of behavior is more likely to destabilize a team instead of bringing the group closer together. And there aren't many clubs that'll accept a coach who can repeatedly and easily lose control. After everything he has been through and his experience, Antiono Conte should know better by now. In Arsenal's part of North London, things look much brighter under Mikel Arteta, especially the development of Martin Ødegaard. Check out this video next.